Hi, I've got some vintage linens that I've made into stockings, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. I'm Kate. Welcome to my sewing room. I don't know if you've ever found things like this when you're garage sailing or at thrift stores or at estate sales, but I love finding these hand embroidered linens that people have done in the past. So these are a couple of sets of pillowcases that I picked up from an estate sale not long ago. They were in pretty rough shape, so I spent a good amount of time removing the stains and cleaning them and bringing as much of the uh, color back, but removing the brown age that came with these. Um, and what I found is even though this particular one was not completed, the designs weren't completely embroidered, I was still able to make this really sweet set of stockings. And so I'm going to show you, walk you through how you can do that yourself if you have vintage linens or other upcycled textiles that you'd like to use. So let's get started. If you like my videos, please like this one and subscribe, and let's get sewing. First thing, let's talk about cleaning these. So when I picked these up, there was some pretty significant staining. You can see a little bit of the residual here on this pillowcase here, but there was, I think it was moisture damage at some point. And so there are lots of brown spots and then some general discoloration. So when I'm cleaning something like this, there are two products that I really love. One is Retro Clean. So this is something that I will pour into a sink or a bathtub and with pretty hot water, let it dissolve, and then I will soak the textiles in here. So there's directions on the back. Sometimes I'll do it a few times because I want the water to stay warm. That's how it's going to work best. But it's going to remove a lot of that general brown discoloration that you get on some of these vintage materials. Another thing is Grandma's Secret Spot Remover. I'll use this on some really tough spots as a little stain remover. It doesn't pull everything up, but I find that most things will come up with a combination of these two things. So I'll drop a link in the video here to some of these. You can find them online in various places. There's a lot of quilt shops that will stock these too. So look around, ask your shops if you don't see it and you want it. But they're both really good at getting some of that general age and ickiness off of some of these old materials. First thing you can see, I've already started here, but I'm going to cut out the part of the design that I want to use. And this one, since the cut is going through the embroidery, I'm using, it's Freight Check, which is something that's going to help prevent those threads from unraveling. And I'm just putting it on the back of the embroidery through where I will be cutting through it to keep it from unraveling while I'm working with it. I'm going to start by separating the front and the back of the pillowcase by cutting down the side seams here. And then that way I can get the embroidered design part out and then save some of the other material, which I'll use on other parts of the stocking. But you can see that the embroidery design is not complete, so I'm not going to be using very much on this particular one, but I do want the his that's on there. So I'm going to cut off the bottom part first. And then I'm going to cut above that, and I'm going to leave a good amount of extra fabric so that I make sure that I have enough to get the full form and shape of the stocking that I'm going to be using later on. So now I'm taking that embroidered design from the other pillowcase and I'm cutting through the middle of it. So part of it will be in this stocking and the other part will be on the other. Then I'm going to line it up and try against my stocking form here because I want to use as much of that as I can. And then just start sewing them together, really, is what it comes down to. So I'm going to cut off a little bit of extra there, and I can use that to fill in the side. And then I'm just going to sew that together. Now you can see I've got that piece sewn in. I'm going to next sew down the his part to the top and press it, and then we'll come back. And here we are. I have the top part of the stocking where the design is, and then I'm going to do the same now for the matching mate or the pair here with the hers. So again, cutting off the top, and then I'm going to take a similar process and piece it together. And there it is. So you can see the full hers part for this stocking. So the next part is I'm going to use some of the extra fabric from the pillowcase to create the rest of the stocking. So I'm cutting again down the seam there, and I'll use part of this for the bottom part of the stocking form. The other part I'm going to use for the back of the stocking. So just sort of lining it up to make sure that I have the right amount of proportion there, and then I'm going to sew it together. And now I have the front of the stocking ready to go. So I'm going to use my paper form now to cut out the shape. So this particular one, I'm just sort of lining it up to make sure that I get as much of the design on there as I can and sort of centering where I want it to be in relation to the top of the stocking. This form is from another pattern that I made in the past. You can use any stocking form, or freehand it or make your own using a stocking that you have existing, but I'm just using it and using a fabric marker now to trace the shape out of where the stocking is going to be. Before I cut it out, I'm actually going to quilt it first, and I'll cut it out to shape later. I want to do sort of diagonal grid lines here, 60-degree diamonds, and so we're going to do that. First, we're going to sandwich it with my quilt batting. I'm just using some scrap batting here that I have because we all have lots of scrap batting pieces, and then smoothing it out. So to keep those layers together while I quilt it, I use the OTIF 505 temporary adhesive spray, and I spray based. So just a little bit on there and give it a good smooth and just make sure that those pieces stick together. To mark the quilting lines, I've got my ruler and I'm going to line it up. For me, I just kind of picked a line and lined it up against the bottom of the stocking there, and I'm using a Hera marker to put a dent in where I'm going to sew along it. Spacing these basically 1 inch apart, and then I'm going to cover the whole stocking one way, and then I'm going to cover it the other direction so that I have the diagonal lines making the diamond grid that I'm going to quilt all over this. Once I have all of these lines marked, I'm going to go take it to my machine and just stitch along those indentations. I'm just using my regular piecing foot. You could use a walking foot if you want, but notice that there is no backing on this sandwich. It is just the top and the batting. So we're just sewing it, quilting it together like that. And here's the piece quilted with my diagonal grid. So I've got all of my pieces quilted, the front of the stocking and the back of the stocking, and cut to the shape after I quilted it using my paper form that I used to draw it before. I've also cut 2 lining pieces of the same shape that are mirrored for each stocking. And then I've got to sew these together. So the 2 outside pieces I'm going to sew together with the right sides facing together, leaving the top of the stocking open, but going around the rest of the sides. Then on the lining pieces, it's similar, going to put both together with the right sides facing each other, but in addition to leaving the top of it open, I also have to leave a 4-inch gap open on the back. So I'll sew along the sides, but leaving a 4-inch gap. Now that those are sewn together, I'm going to take the outside part of the stocking and I'm going to turn it so the right side is out. When I do this, I'm going to push all the seams out so that they are more or less sitting flat. You could clip the curves inside if you want to. I don't, but you know, you can probably get them a little flatter if you do. The lining piece I'm going to leave as it is. You see here, I do have my gap in the back. That needs to stay there. I'm going to put the stocking outside inside the lining piece. So when you do this, the right side of the outer part of the stocking is going to be facing the right side of the lining piece. And then I'm going to clip the top so that it is clip or pin the top together, because I'm going to end up sewing these together next. That's sewn together now. I just clipped off the little bit of extra ribbon hanging off there, and now I'm turning it all right side out through the opening in the lining. Now that I've got it right side out, I'm going to fold those seam allowances down and clip them together because we'll need to sew that closed next. There it is. I just sewed it on my machine. You could hand sew it if you don't want to see the seam, but it's inside on the lining, so I don't mind. I'm going to do it quickly, and then I push the lining inside of the stocking. Once I get it all pushed out, we have a finished and complete stocking made from a vintage embroidered pillowcase. And there you have it. So you can make yourself some stockings, maybe a set out of vintage, found, upcycled materials and linens. They make great gifts if you have, you know, the newlywed couple in your life, or you're updating your own decoration. This is a great option. And of course, it's handmade and it's upcycled. So all the things that we are loving right now. But thank you for watching. Go forth, go make your own stockings. If you do, please let me know and tag me at Due North Handmade on social media. And please like my videos and subscribe, and I will see you later. Happy quilting!